It's amazing that quite often with these sorts of wines, you can pick up older, mature vintages today for less than the current vintage.
Yeah.
And that's really interesting from a sort of investment-y point of view, where unless you're spending loads of money, you can quite often pick these wines up for not a lot more today than they were when you paid for them 10 years ago. And so it's really interesting that the 2012 is more accessible price-wise than the 2018 is today.
And do we know what that is?
I just think there's sort of secondary market. Well, Nicola will know more about this than I will, but there's the secondary market and the resale value of sort of £50 bottles of Centimillion that people don't necessarily know. It's sort of much harder to trade than, you know, bottles of Le Pen or Petrus.
Yeah, thanks for that, Dan. I suspect also, you know, En Primeur might be playing a big part with some of these wines and what prices they're initially released at. You know, you look back to 2010 when the market was probably at its peak and the release prices back then was so high. I imagine, you know, they've come down a lot since. And then you compare to, you know, wines like, was it 2019 that were released right during the COVID pandemic, that were all massively discounted and have since risen in price. So it's fascinating to see how the market kind of changes. And, you know, ultimately, I guess, you know, people will pay what they think they're worth. And, you know, it's an interesting point though. I do find it fascinating that
one of the fun things with the Bordeaux investment is that it is a market and everything fluctuates, and buying things at the right time and the right moment. And 2019 is in the middle of COVID when everyone needed the cash. Just means that in 10 years time, people are going to make a lot of money out of those wines, not because they're better. They might not necessarily taste better. They might not have as much, you know, consumer preference. All these 19s are drinking brilliantly. But that's, from an investment point of view, that's not necessarily the debate people are having. They're like, oh, I picked them up for cheap in the middle of COVID, is the reason they're making money, not because the wines are more desirable than the 2020s or the 18s.